Welcome to Perspective and Potential, where we explore thoughtful ways to navigate life, strengthen families, and grow into who we're becoming. I'm Abigail Straight, joined by my co host and mother, Gwen Fund. Together, we explore ideas and stories through honest conversations about personal growth, faith, and the everyday choices that shape our lives, inviting you to grow, shift your perspective, and step more fully into who you're becoming. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can check us out at perspectiveandpotential.com. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in and see where a new perspective might take you. In this episode, we're stepping into a part of growth that most of us would rather avoid. The part where change is no longer theoretical and it starts to cost us something. In Genesis 32, we see Jacob in a moment of tension and uncertainty. He's between his past and what's ahead of him. He's not who he once was, but he's not yet who he's becoming. And instead of resolution coming quickly, he finds himself wrestling physically, emotionally, spiritually through the night. And I believe that kind of struggle feels familiar to all of us. So much of real transformation happens in spaces like that. Not when things are clear, not when we feel confident, but when we're forced to slow down, confront what we've been avoiding, and stay engaged, even when it's uncomfortable. What's interesting is that we don't usually recognize these moments as formative while we're in them. We tend to label them as frustrating, exhausting, or disruptive, even though later on, we often point to them as turning points. So let's start with an honest question. Why do we forget that every meaningful change we've made has been hard?
Well, hope springs eternal. Even though we understand that the struggle is what made the accomplishment so valuable, still, we kind of hope that now that we know how to appreciate accomplishment, maybe this time it's going to be a little easier. So Ralph Waldo Emerson is quoted as saying, "That which we persist in doing becomes easier for us to do. Not that the nature of the thing itself has changed, but that our power to do it has increased." And I really think that applies to persevering through all the hard things in life. So it does become a mindset. We have done hard things. We can do hard things. How many times do we tell the kids that, right? And once we stop looking for that easy way out, our personal resolve to stretch and grow begins to flourish. And we realize from the beginning that there might be mountains to climb or problems to be solved, but the wrestle and the struggle will, in the end, make us stronger and it will be worth it.
What you said is so true. Even when we know that growth requires effort, we always still hope that the next challenge is just going to pass more easily. And then when it doesn't, we're forced to notice our default responses. And that's usually where the real work begins. So let's talk about this. What do you usually do when something in your life doesn't resolve quickly?
Well, I used to pray for patience, but I've, gotten over that. I don't do that anymore because every time that I did, I ended up with a slow, continual challenge that stretched my patience to near breaking. But if I'm being honest, in hindsight, I have been so blessed with the patience that I have acquired through those experiences. And coupled with my faith in God, I've learned to trust and wait on the Lord. I know that He sees things I can't see. And through the years, I've come to trust His timing rather than my own. I have experienced miracles in my life by waiting. and trusting Him with the details. I earnestly try to do my part, whatever that is. And then I put my faith and trust in Him to make up for what I lack at the appropriate time. So the testing of our faith is really what helps to grow patience in our character. And patience helps with our emotional regulation and our resilience, as well as giving us that edge to make better decisions in our life. It also gives us added strength in dealing with any adversity that shows up. Um, Waiting on the Lord is a skill that I think He wants us all to learn.
And, here's something that I've realized too. We pray, we ask for support, but what are we doing in between the prayers, right? Do we just passively wait, or instead are we choosing to exercise faith and make those forward movements? Because I feel like sometimes, even in doing so, we may still face resistance that stretches us or refines us. But over time, those stretched moments don't just teach us, like you said, patience. They shape, like we talked about looking forward into the future, they shape how we're going to respond under pressure. And they really just strengthen our ability to stay steady, to make clear decisions and keep going even when the outcome isn't immediate. And I think of like emergency response personnel. They are put intentionally in stressful, unpredictable situations so that they can become more confident and more, familiar with navigating the unknown. And I think in a way that's something that we have the opportunity to do too as we struggle and wrestle is to make forward motions in the unknown, and that resolve grows stronger inside of us. So what other kinds of growth only happen through resistance?
Well, all growth is really born through resistance. If you think about it, from cells dividing to these giant airliners taking off from the ground, every movement takes energy and effort. Our whole world is designed with wind and rain and adversities like heat and cold. We come into the world really helpless. We need someone to help us continue to grow through their efforts of feeding and caring for us until we become able to take care of those things ourselves. So without that help, we would really wither and die from the resistance that is constantly surrounding us. When any living thing stops growing, natural resistance of the world breaks it down and eventually destroys it. That old adage that if you don't lose it, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. um, and of course, Mark 4:25 addresses this concept. For he that hath, to him shall be given, and he that hath not, from him shall be taken even that which he hath. In this verse, Christ is talking to his disciples about knowledge and wisdom, but nature itself shows us that this principle is very much effective in many ways. We all have muscles, but if we don't move, they will begin to wither. We all have potential, but if we don't grow it, we will lose the opportunity to become all that we might have had we put in more diligent effort. Um, so, you can find many of those examples in the scriptures. Galatians 6, 4 and 5, and 8 and 9, Paul talks about those things as well.
I think it's kind of like how our skin responds to friction. When something rubs repeatedly against the skin, it's interesting because the body doesn't just remove the friction, it adapts to it. The skin thickens, it becomes more protective. So, what once caused pain eventually becomes manageable. And the resistance then, it's not that it disappears, we just become more equipped to handle it. So, I want to just talk about the word wrestle. What does it mean to wrestle with God rather than run from Him?
So, if we understand that God created each of us with purpose and potential, He started a masterpiece that He is allowing us to finish. So, His will for us is to reach our potential physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And our natural inclinations tend to be more toward selfishness or slothfulness. We do desire that ease and comfort that we often talk about. And of course, we want our natural desires to be filled. So the wrestle is really between our natural tendencies and His will for us to grow into our full potential. Through the light of Christ, that all of us possess, we know that we can do better than we're currently doing. But we also know doing better requires effort and discomfort. So Christ came to save us from our sinful, slothful nature and to show us, by example, the kind of people that we could and should become. But He doesn't do it for us. We each have to wrestle ourselves out of those natural tendencies and into the new creatures that God created us to become. So when we wrestle with God, He helps us find the strength that we need to grow and overcome all the adversities that we face. It's important to realize that that this particular test of our abilities, it is not for Heavenly Father. He already knows our potential. He packed it in there. But the testing is really for us to discover the potential that He's blessed us with. And you see that in Jacob's wrestle. He had done some things that were maybe not exactly square before he left on the journey, but now he was headed to to a place where he was going to be blessed. He would be blessed with a posterity, and if you look at the rest of the story of Jacob, that even into his old age, when Joseph saved his family from the famine, the wrestle that he had, not only gave him added strength, but added blessings.
Um, Growing up, hearing the story of Jacob and hearing the phrase wrestling with God, I think as a young child, my mind almost thought of it as him fighting with God. But in that way, in looking at it with a different perspective, wrestling with God isn't then about opposition, it's about engagement. Um, and, when I think about some of the things that maybe life throws at us, right? Some of the circumstances that we may find ourselves in, maybe we've lost a spouse or a parent. Maybe we've lost a job. Um, Maybe we don't feel like we're getting recognition the way we should from family members or um, you know our superiors. Um, and and Running from God kind of looks like avoidance, right? We distract ourselves, we numb, we stay busy, and we look for relief instead of growth. But wrestling, on the other hand, means staying present, even when what God is asking of us is uncomfortable. Engaging with Him in those circumstances means we might have to be open to what He's trying to teach us. And the struggle Jacob experienced wasn't about whether God was strong enough, because I think we know the answer. It was about whether Jacob was just willing to stay in the process long enough to be changed by it. And the same is totally true for us. Because, like you said, God already knows what we're capable of. He knows it. But it is that engagement, it is the wrestling that is how we come to know what we are capable of. And when we wrestle with God, like, unlike my young mind thought, we're not fighting Him. We're confronting really the parts of ourselves that are just resistant to that change, even when change might already be there. And instead of being abandoned in that struggle, what actually happens is that we're strengthened through it. Jacob didn't walk away untouched, he walked away changed. And then that change stayed with him. I think another thing, in a different perspective too, is as parents, it's so tempting for us to remove that struggle for our children. I mean, after all, our instinct is to nurture and protect them. But sometimes, right, if we can recognize that the godly change within us, then we should allow our children that opportunity as well. And this is where I see, unfortunately, I believe, a major breakdown in our society where parents feel the need to swoop in and protect their children from so many things, whether it's, confrontation with other children, from accountability with teachers, from discomfort in being asked to do hard or challenging things. But it's in the struggle that is exactly where growth happens. It's only with continually seeing something through that we see the fruits of persevering through struggle. And maybe we talk about that for a moment.
Again, let's look at Jacob. First of all, he goes and he finds a wife and they trick him. Talk about learning patience. He works 7 years for this wife and then they trick him. And then he has to work 7 more years to get the one he wants. I mean, talk about a trial and patience. But then the blessings that came from that sojourn during all that long time, um, he amassed a great quantity of sheep and goats. Um, the Lord blessed whatever, his father-in-law said, "You can have the speckled ones or the brown ones," or whatever. Those seemed to be the ones that, that just multiplied the fastest. Um, so he had these trials, and then, he had to sojourn back to his land, and he was sure his brother wanted to kill him for, taking the birthright. But when he gets back, the blessing is his brother welcomes him with open arms. And then, we look even further down and he loses Rachel and he loses Joseph. And, he's devastated by these great losses in his life. But in the end, Joseph sends for him and saves the entire family through, the loss that Jacob suffered in losing Joseph. He and his posterity were also saved and made into a great nation. So if we can keep that perspective, that it's really worth the wrestle, right? Because nothing that we spend that kind of energy in following and wrestling with ourselves to become all that God knows we can become, there are blessings that are attached to that we can't even imagine or comprehend.
And it's interesting as we look back on that story, and perhaps that was always a part of the story. Um, what parts of our own stories are rewritten, or maybe it's not about being rewritten, but what blessings do we gain only through that perseverance?
Well, through perseverance, our very characters are refined, and we gain kind of a spiritual maturity. And it's those things that are gonna secure us a bounteous harvest of righteousness in our character. So anything we persist in doing, we can learn to do well. And like Emerson said, eventually our ability to do those things will increase because that is how habits are formed and character is actually built by persevering through repetition and in the face of resistance.
So, what you're saying is that growth comes through wrestling. The growth that comes through wrestling usually leaves something behind. And it may slow us down, humble us, or remind us of what we've been through. But those reminders don't have to mean that we were defeated. So let's talk about some of the things that we're left with. How do scars become evidence of growth instead of signs of failure?
Again, we can go back to Jacob. And of course, his leg withered from the touch. And he had a discernible difference in his body. And that became an outward sign of not only strength, but healing, of growth, resilience, and most of all, survival. So, scars are really a testament to the battles that we fight and that we made it through. They testify to our ability to endure and to even conquer. And so that goes for our internal scars as well. I've worked with so many people who have endured trauma and abuse and have healed as they wrestled with their own self worth and they persevered. God imbued us with power, but we have to put forth the effort and tap into that power in order to grow into the person that He really wishes us to become.
Yeah, looking back on my own life, some of the hardest things that I've been through, I would have to admit that I don't even want to let go of some of those hard memories because it's made me a better person in the end. And so there is beauty that can come from those hardships. And I keep coming back to the image of Jacob walking away, changed, not triumphant, not untouched, but he's marked. Slower, maybe, wiser, definitely, and more aware of who he was becoming. So, as we think back today, wrestling toward transformation doesn't mean that something has gone wrong. Often it means something important is happening. The resistance that you might feel in what you're experiencing right now, the waiting that seems to be taking forever, the struggle that maybe we just wish would resolve more quickly. Well, take heart. Those are often the very places where strength, patience, and faith are being formed. Because Growth rarely leaves us the same as we were. Sometimes it leaves scars. Sometimes it leaves a limp. But those marks don't have to tell a story of failure. It's quite the opposite, actually. They tell the story of endurance, healing, and staying in the process long enough to be changed. So if you find yourself in a season that feels heavy or unresolved, maybe the reminder today is simple. Don't run from the wrestle. Let's stay present. Let's stay engaged. Let's trust that God is doing work in each of us, even if the outcome isn't clear yet. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, please be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. Your input helps shape the conversation and makes perspective and potential even more impactful. We're Gwen and Abby, and you've been listening to Perspective and Potential. Until next time, keep exploring new perspectives, and remember that every small change can lead to something big. Food for thought.
Bon appetit.